I feel like at like Google stage, I know I'll get to your question, I promise, but like at the
Yeah, no
Google,
worries.
so much of it is about connecting with everyone in the company because there's so many roles and there's so many people. You have to constantly be networking and find out who you need to talk to, because also there's lots of change. They're always doing reorgs all the time to keep you on your toes. So it's just so important to know your team and know everyone else around your team, because like you might not realize that there's some department you might relate to that you need to connect with. So it's just so important to kind of have that willingness to network and kind of understand the awareness. Like on the Series A side, like I said, you don't need to be a mastery at your product skills because you're basically failing fast a lot. Like you're trying to get to that stage of scale so that you can get the next round of funding to prove that you've achieved that level of scale. At the level like what we're at, where we're at with Ardoc, like we're at that part from like startup to scale up. And so what I'm looking for are PMs who have the fundamentals. I need to know that they can do everything from discovery to deployment to even partially go to market. They don't need to know all of go to market, but they need to know some of it, and they need to know who they have to partner with. They need to know the end to end.
Hello there, welcome back. I'm Afonso and today's guest is Melissa Mills, VP of Product at Ardoc, former Director of Product at Kahoot and former Global Product Lead at Google in Silicon Valley. Ardoc is a fast-growing scale-up in Norway recognized by Gartner as a leading enterprise architecture tool. Many enterprise companies like Carlsberg Group are choosing Ardoc, and this episode will give you an insider view of how they build their products. Melissa and I talked about Ardoc's growth and product journey, product management in big tech, startups and scale-ups, product managers' traits according to company stage, the importance of domain knowledge in B2B, how product and sales should partner, and so much more. For this season, I'm interviewing more than 30 product leaders in Scandinavia, so subscribe to my newsletter for free so you don't miss out. All right, let's dive in. We have spoken so many times on this podcast about how talking frequently with users is so important for product teams. It lets you understand user needs, test your designs, and make sure you're building the right products. But many teams tell me that they can't find time for it in their busy workday because recruiting the right users is too hard. So I want to quickly mention a company I'm advising that can help you with this. UX Signals lets you target users inside your website or app and automatically book interviews into your calendar. So you can put the recruiting on autopilot and just show up for the conversations. Instead of waiting weeks, you can get interviews within a few hours and talk to people while they will still have the user experience fresh in their minds. It's used by big companies and public organizations like DNB Bank, Vipps Mobile Pay, NAV, and many, many more who are building digital products and services with millions of users. I really recommend checking it out on uxsignals.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Tell them Afonso sent you and you'll get a 50% off your trial. All right, Melissa, we are live. How are you today?
Doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good, thank you. It's so nice to see you again. All right, we have so much to talk about.
There's a lot we can cover.
I'm really looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to it all weekend. So,
Cool.
you are, you've been a global product lead at Google in San Francisco. You've had other roles in the States, and then product director at Kahoot. You moved to Norway.
Yeah.
And now VP of product at Ardoc.
Yes.
So this is quite of an interesting career with so many like startups, scale-ups, big tech. I want to dig into all of that. So let's start with the obvious. What are the main differences in your journey that you've experienced from big tech, working at Google, to scale-ups to startups? Like, give us a little bit of the main differences you felt when it comes to product management.
100%. I definitely think at the different types of levels, you experience different types of skills and certain things you need to focus on in product management. There's a really great book called The Build Trap by Melissa Perry. And a lot of the examples she references comes from big tech. So like in big tech, typically you have these huge companies, huge organizations. And also to clarify, I was there when it was growth at all costs. So they had very aggressive hiring practices. So essentially, you had a very particular role to play. you were essentially one of many, but then that small sliver of responsibility you had a massive impact. And so you ended up specializing really deeply. It also means you became extremely dependent on other people. And so, and what happens is on your product management journey, if you were to start at a big tech company, you might be thrown immediately into like already predefined things like learning how to write success criteria, learning how to write user stories, and kind of building up like user stories for Jira tickets. It becomes very tactile. But again, like in that particular example, it was just a very niche experience. So I was in charge of our dynamic marketing for apps product. So as part of the suite of our app re-engagement ads under our app install ads. And like I just lived and breathed that one particular area, and I knew the customers and I knew the space. But then like support fell on our product operations manager, and then you had like a tech lead, and then you had other engineers, and then you had lots of different people in sales to help with specialist roles. And then on the flip side, when you go to a startup, like even say like a scale up, funding's limited. They don't have as much depth and coverage in terms of customers. So it's really just about wearing many hats. And so there's basically a spectrum you hit. So when you hit those like early stage Series A companies, you basically have to do not just the product management job, but other aspects of the product management, like other aspects of like the company to keep it alive. It also means then the depth of work you're doing might be a little shallower. Like you might not have to have expert user stories. It might just have to be good enough so that the feature can get built. Because you know what? It's probably going to be iterated again anyway in 6 months. Like it's probably going to be a whole new product at that kind of stage. My sweet spot is what I really found now, which is kind of the Series D stage. It's like 200 plus size people. It's when there's enough funding where you might have product market fit or you have enough consistency. You now have departments that are a bit more specialized. So like there's a product marketing lead that I can talk to if I have marketing needs. So I get to dive a little bit more deeply into the product management, but then the scope is broad enough where I'm not kind of dividing my work across many people like I would at Google, for example. I like the kind of breadth that I get to play with here. So like Kahoot and Ardoc are kind of at that stage where I'm like, you're right, I don't know marketing that well. I don't know support that well. I can't really play those hats, but I do know product management and I know the elements that encompass that. And then I can support in those directions. So that's my bread and butter. That's what I work in. But I think I wouldn't have figured that out had I not like played the field a little bit here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really resonates with me. So I had this chat with John Cutler. For those who are listening, you can go back to that episode. I really recommend. And something we talked about is John was talking about the fact that folks in big tech, like Amazon, Google, and so on, they become very specialized in a certain area. And then when you go to a different company, you're not necessarily overperformer again. So that's sort of one point that he made of people that transition from big tech to other companies. They have to adapt to what you were talking about, doing more, maybe, kind of going through what you have to do in product management, but also being more open for other things, because you don't have the support you used to have before. Like you talked about having those teams of specialists supporting you, for example, at Google. I'm sure when you moved to Kahoot, for example, that changed, because as you mentioned, there's not enough funding to have all these people working with you and supporting you and so on. So how was that transition for you as well? Like how was that adaptation, I guess? Or did you feel that, by the way? I feel I should probably ask
definitely.
that first. Did you feel, does that resonate or not at all? Like you had a completely different experience?
No, totally. And this kind of goes back to like you need to, and you kind of learn to figure yourself out over time. Like we're all trying to figure out who we are as people, but like I think this is where you need different strengths and different skill sets, being able to handle risk versus certainty, being able to handle ambiguity versus less ambiguity. Like I think with Google, like starting with this Google experience, everything's extremely defined. Like I remember it took us like a year to put together our PRD because we had this waterfall type model. You had to be ruthless because if you made a mistake, that could be a bug and that could have, an impact to $200 million potentially. So like you got to be prepared for that kind of volume. You can't really mess that up. I don't think I'm that detail oriented to really appreciate that much. And it takes time. And I don't think I have the patience for that kind of momentum. So like, to be honest, I love Google. I learned so much at Google, but that definitely wasn't playing to my strengths and what I enjoy as an individual. And then I essentially swinged all the way to the other side of the pendulum at a basically pre-seed Series A company called Involve, AI company. And then on that side, it was like there was nothing. And so you had to fill in the gaps. You had to figure it out. And I think the hardest part is when you're at that early stage investment level, you might have had an idea that just generated the enough momentum and investment, but you don't really quite have that product market fit yet, or you don't have that repeatability yet. You're still trying to get to that. That's kind of Series B and C. So there's a lot of uncertainty. You're just trying to keep the lights on. You're trying to stay alive. You're trying to figure out how you're going to fit in this space. How are you going to carve out your corner? So like literally we could design a product and it could be completely irrelevant in 6 months because we totally missed the mark. Iterate a lot. And that can be also like, I loved that freedom, but the riskiness was a little insane, like, which is okay. Like some people love that, but that just wasn't my jam. I needed to feel like more progress and momentum was being made because it's a big struggle. Like, you have to be really committed to kind of see that through to finally find that product market fit. And that was hard for me. Like, and you know what? That's okay too. So like, again, I find the stage, like I said, is this kind of midpoint where I know enough, like I know where I can play the role. I can ask the right questions to figure out the stage of maturity of the company. And then I can come in with I just know the spectrum of product management, especially like SaaS product management. Then I can come in and I know what good looks like. I know how to show what good looks like. I can train up what good looks like. And then I can help in kind of building that within the team. And I can ask the right questions so the supporting departments can help in filling in the gaps or identifying other uncertain elements. I have a team that I can lean on as well where we support each other a little bit because they each know what good looks like in their field. And so then we can fill in the gaps together on like the end-to-end user experience.
Awesome. And this is one of the reasons why I was so looking forward to talk to you, Melissa, because you have this really unique journey. Because usually I feel that, a lot of people that are in the startup world, they stay in the startup world. And I know a lot of people that are in the startup world, and then it is absolutely. And you are in that world, and then you move to corporate, and a lot of people hate it. The opposite sometimes is also true. But then you have those like you who adapt and kind of love it, and you fell in love with the scale up. It seems because you went from Kahoot, now Ardoc. Anyway, super exciting. I want to dig into Ardoc a little bit and also kind of the growth journey and how you do product in Ardoc for those who are listening. They're probably really curious about that too. But before we go into that, differences between San Francisco and Norway. I want to dig into it because you've been in Norway for a while. You worked in San Francisco. Tell us, Melissa, what are the biggest differences, like the cultural differences in product management at work that you felt that you want to share?
That's a good question. So basically when I was basically in the Bay, I had like the two jobs. I had the Google job and then the Series A job. So most of the examples I have are kind of to those realms. The Google job, there's some common threads across both of them that I think are just by nature American. Like the hours are long. You put in the hours. Google's extremely competitive. It brings a lot of type A personalities. If you want to have any progress in the company, you do have to work. You have to put in the time. And if you figured out how to game the system, good for you. I could never get there. I just had to do the work. On the other side, you have like at the early stage startup companies, there is a huge startup culture, and the startup kind of almost becomes your identity a little bit. You put in the hours, you're working weekends, like it's kind of this kind of workaholic lifestyle. I don't really see that in Norway as much. But again, I've only been here at the series like C and D level, so it's a little bit more established companies. But I do think that the American culture kind of drives for that. And I think when you're having so much uncertainty, especially at like that early stage startup life, you need to move fast and you need to basically be very in tune with what's going on. So you do have to kind of really invest that commitment. So I do think that's why so many startups come out of the Bay, because that culture, albeit a bit unhealthy, really fosters that kind of growth that many companies need. But honestly, still, even with that unhealthy culture, many companies still fail. So it has to be a very intentional decision whether you really want to commit to that kind of lifestyle there. And then of course at Google, I was on the global product. So like we had our product being used in Asia. We had our product being used in Europe. There were departments within departments and specialists by region as well. So like we would take turns taking out calls from like 8 a.m. calls with our counterparts in Asia, and then we had evening calls with our counterparts in Europe. And so you were just working all the time. but then it was very international, and that in itself was really exciting. But I got a little burnt out from that too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually how it goes, isn't it? Like with long hours. I'm really glad and grateful that we have that culture in Norway of not doing a lot of long hours, generally speaking. But of course, I do know of people that want to do the work because they're the founders, and that's totally fine. But generally speaking, it is a more balanced lifestyle, definitely.
100%. And I love that it's a choice. That's the biggest thing. Like I had my son in the States, and I wouldn't, if I were to leave work at 4 to pick him up from daycare, that would not be acceptable. And so what I love in Norway is I can pick up my kid from Barnehagen and it's totally fine. But then also, like, if I want to work a little bit more, if I have maybe some deadlines coming up or some major commitments I got to get out, like, it's okay if I work in the evenings, and then it's my choice, and like I'm helping and I'm moving things forward, but it's also not expected 100% of the time, which I'm grateful for. So I appreciate that I'm in an environment where I don't have to feel burnt out, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome about Norway. Totally. So, Melissa, let's dig into a little bit into Ardoq. For those who are listening and they've heard Ardoq before, of course, success case in Norway, a really sort of sexy, hot company out there in the Norwegian tech scene at the moment. Tell us a little bit, what problem is Ardoq solving, or what problems is Ardoq trying to solve?
I love that you're positioning us that way. I'm like, I would never describe enterprise architecture as sexy, but I love this. We're in the EA space. I never heard of enterprise architecture until I came here. But basically, the way I would describe it is we're essentially like a modeling software. So there's a lot, like, I think a lot of times there's a tendency to think only of these like SaaS-based companies, but there's a lot of huge companies here that work with lots of complicated org structures and business structures and process structures. Like, you have offshore rigging, you have railways, you have governments, you have banks. And again, some of these companies have been around for centuries. And so a lot of times these companies need to figure out how to map basically their digital blueprint, or we call it a digital twin, and be able to simulate what could happen. And so there's a department called enterprise architects that specialize in that. And so what we have is we have a software that supports that. So they're able to kind of pass that digital twin into our product, and then they can track and measure implications. So for example, if you're a traditional company, maybe you started with on-prem servers because that's what you did in the 50s, and now you've realized you want to go to the cloud. That could take 5 years to migrate. And so you would map that migration and map the consequences of that business decision, or even IT decision, depending on how you define it, in our product. And so it just helps in taking these really, really complex ideas and being able to understand the implications of them through our software. So again, very niche. I totally get if most people aren't familiar with our product, but it's a really cool problem to solve. It's a really cool group of people here. And it's definitely, again, the best part of product management is working on problems. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit more about the structure of when it comes to product management. How do you structure your teams? Do you have cross-functional teams? Like, walk us through a little bit how you're organizing. People always love to hear that from different companies.
100%.
In Scandinavia.
Totally. So we have cross-functional teams. Essentially, you have your trifecta. You have your tech lead, you have your designer, and you have your product manager. And then within that, you have additional people on the team. You'll have front-end engineers, you'll have back-end engineers, you'll have QA. And then you'll also have, we have a team that's subject matter experts, because this is a pretty niche industry. We don't want to make sure we're generalizing. So they're part of the group as well to help us in making sure we're making informed decisions too. So it's the group that basically gets to work together. Each team has a certain level of responsibility on the product. We also have platform teams, so they're dedicated to maintaining work in the tech stack, supporting the dev department, the dev and dev teams. But essentially, every team has autonomy over the area that they cover. And then we use OKRs to kind of establish what each team does, and we try and align them to the company goals. So 2 big initiatives we have going on right now is we're trying to make the product easier to use. We're calling it ease of use, trying to make all these complexity easier to navigate. The other thing we're trying to do is we're calling it enterprise readiness. Essentially, we're targeting more larger scale enterprise customers, and as we go to larger enterprise customers, that has implications. So how can we make sure the solutions we've built and the features we built kind of cater to that? And so each team, they're experts in their domain. They know what to do. So we basically give them the guidance of based off these directives, this is the problem we're trying to solve. And then they work through how to potentially solve that and how to solution that. And then, of course, we always have a feedback loop with customers and even our internal teams. We have a pretty extensive commercial team. So there's lots of people for us to talk to pressure test what we're doing. So there's a continuous feedback loop. So the goal is to fail quickly and fail early. So there's lots of, the trade-off with that is there's lots of like circling conversations, especially at the planning stage. But at least we get that instead of at the later end release stage. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
Cool. So those feedback loops then, there's a few things I'm interested in digging into. You mentioned the domain experts, being a very specific industry, we want to bring these people in. I'm curious about the collaboration of domain experts with the team when doing discovery, for example. Do they join? Do they sort of are the ones providing most of the insights to the teams? Like how does that interaction with customers to test new ideas and discover happen typically at Ardoc?
Yeah, so I can give an example around that. Essentially, like again, there's a lot of variables to consider when you're trying to evaluate, and what we don't want to do is over-engineer it. We don't want to put too many variables in place. We have to figure out how can we streamline this? What can we do to create like a priority path so it's solvable and scalable? Because the idea is we're not trying to build for one customer, we're trying to build for many. So what's really powerful is our subject matter experts can help us as being like a kicking off point. And what I try to avoid is handoffs. Like it's not like they give us what the answer is and then we dissect it, but it's rather a feedback loop. So like one example we have is on our integrations team. We were recently doing a integration with a partnering software. And so it's they specialize in what we call business process modeling, which is a type of use case or instance you would use enterprise architecture for. And in the process of trying to use business process modeling, we went to these subject matter experts and we're like, where do we start? Like, what would be our base case here? And then they would give their recommendation. And then we would pressure test it with the customers because we had customers who needed this feature, who needed this integration. And so then we would find if there's a pattern, like what parts are consistent, what parts are atypical. And then we would give that feedback back. And as they're trying to build, the best practice or the use case of how this would work in the product, how could we simulate this for every customer, not just the ones we're talking to, they could then adapt that feedback as well. So it creates an iterative feedback. It's kind of like that classic agile practice where you'll never have complete information when you start working. So as you get information, you have to constantly reinforce it so that the broader group and the broader entity can grow with it as well. So then that complete knowledge is shared with the group instead of just sitting with one person.
Yeah, I think what tends to be a classic blunder is very specific industries, for example, healthcare and so on. They rely too much on the domain experts and then they don't talk to customers. They don't do what you're talking about, basically. They just get the input from domain experts and they go and build it. So I like what you said. You basically use domain experts in the team to help form hypotheses with their knowledge, and then you go and test it with customers and with them, and you have all of these feedback loops going around. That's how it sounds from what you've described.
Totally. I think a big part of product management, like everyone has a role to play, 100%. Like I could never be a designer, but I can help I can ask questions to support design. Design can do the same for me, tech lead same. We all have a role to play. A big piece of product management is making sure that I almost feel like we're almost like the facilitator, or sometimes I call myself a glorified coordinator. Like my job is not to have an opinion, but rather to aggregate and try and find what's the common pattern, what's the common path that can allow us to achieve the end goal quickly. So one thing we use a lot at the company is jobs to be done frameworks. So rather than basing it off of the solution or what we think it should be, we go back to what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the job that we need to do here? And then with that, then it's about the path of least resistance within the platform to achieve that. And so again, like as a consumer, consumers do not think about this. Like as a subject matter expert, your role is, this industry front and back, the edge cases, the general things, but it's not about how do you build a job to be done. So then we each have a role in which we bring that knowledge in, and then our job is to figure out how can we scale it? How can we make this a consistent behavior in the product? And then we use design from a UX perspective. So, and again, everyone can be wrong. That's the whole point of failing. So that's why you have this feedback loop, and that's why you have each other asking questions. Like you need to be able to have this dialogue. You can't just put Like, for example, you can't just have the design. I can't put all of the pressure on design to be perfect with their design flows. I should be asking questions to support that. Or I can't, if you put all the pressure on the tech lead to know the end-to-end tech stack for the feature you're covering, that's not fair to them. They're human. Human error guarantees they're gonna miss something at some point. You have to support each other by asking questions so that there's this honesty in what you're trying to do. And hopefully there's a certain degree of trust within the team where that's encouraged. And I really hope the PMs on my teams and in general really try and create that environment of trust.
Absolutely, super important, and totally agree on the importance of collaborating and working intensely together, get rid of the handovers and so on. By the way, for those who are listening, Melissa mentioned jobs to be done. I had a chat with Bob Westler, the creator of Jobs to be Done theory and framework. So go back to that. Yay, go back to that episode if you.
Let's use all the jobs to be done.
It's a really, really interesting theory. And by the way, there's a lot of different perspectives on jobs to be done. So that is, I think, one of the most interesting conversations I had so far. Okay. You mentioned the role of product management, and I want to ask you, because, Melissa, you know this, like industry in Norway, but beyond, we all have different flavors of what great product management looks like in our companies. Yeah. Context matters. In a low regulated industry, a PM will, have to take care of certain things that in a highly regulated industry, they wouldn't. And so, and there's a lot of these other nuances. So I want to ask you, at Ardoc specifically, what are some of the traits or competencies or skills that you think are incredibly important for a product manager?
Oh, I can speak generally, which I'm so tempted to do, but I realize you want specific for Ardoc, so I'm also trying to think about that. I think part of this also goes back to, like, you're right. I think some of it's industry. Like, for example, if you're doing fintech, high degree of efficacy. Like, you got to have really accurate deployments. You can't really retract a deployment if people's balances are in the debt or if they're in the deficit or something. So what I love is the industries I've worked in have been relatively safe industries. It's like, oh no, if we make a mistake, we can just roll it back. Like, there's no major implications. It's not like it's hardware or something. But another part of this too is like the different stages, like I talked about, the different levels of Series A versus large, big companies. I feel like at like Google stage, I know I'll get to your question, I promise, but like at the
no worries.
So much of it is about connecting with everyone in the company because there's so many roles and there's so many people. You have to constantly be networking and find out who you need to talk to, because also there's lots of change. They're always doing reorgs all the time to keep you on your toes. So it's just so important to know your team and know everyone else around your team, because like you might not realize that there's some department you might relate to that you need to connect with. So it's just so important to kind of have that willingness to network and kind of understand the awareness. Like on the Series A side, like I said, you don't need to be a mastery at your product skills because you're basically failing fast a lot. Like, you're trying to get to that stage of scale so that you can get the next round of funding to prove that you've achieved that level of scale. At the level like where we're at with Ardoc, like we're at that part from like startup to scale up. And so what I'm looking for are PMs who have the fundamentals. I need to know that they can do everything from discovery to deployment to even partially go to market. They don't need to know all of go to market, but they need to know some of it, and they need to know who they have to partner with. They need to know the end to end. So yeah, like you go discovery or like planning, and solutioning, and then the execution, and then you have final review, final checks, and then deployments, and then go to market. They need to know the end to end, and they need to know it well. Because again, the other part here is anything you're going to build now is the next thing is you need to know how to build to scale. So it's not just about testing it to make sure it works, but you're going to be working with an existing tech stack. That tech stack's going to have debt. You're going to have to figure out how you can build this in a way that can allow you to continue to build with other customers without having to require to refactor in another 6 months. So there just are elements that you have to be prepared for in how you think about your solution and your planning in the beginning that can help inform the final output of what you build. So that's where I think just, again, that competency, that thoroughness in the end-to-end product management pipeline is just really important. And then the idea is like now our teams are starting to specialize. So we have some teams that are just focused on integrations. We have some teams that are just focused on the first parts of the user journey. We have some teams that are focused on the end parts of the user journey. So now, like, again, there's even more of a specialization now, which is really exciting. So again, knowing the ins and outs of that kind of pipeline are so critical. Does that answer your
Absolutely.
question?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the key ideas that keeps coming up in our conversations is that the more startup scale up focused you are, the more of a generalist you have to be,
Yes.
at least in the beginning. And I think that's fair, and that's been kind of a concept going around, and that's for the logical reason that in bigger organizations you do have a different support structure, and so if someone wants to apply for a job at Ardoc, now they know for a PM job. Now they know,
There you go.
now they know that they need to be familiar with discovery, which I would say is essential anyway, regardless of where you are.
Of course.
But all the way to go to market, which I think is lacking in a lot of product people these days. It's like this business savviness, marketing, kind of going to market, understanding how the business.
And then I think
actually
there's
works.
different, like we talked about different verticals too. I think there's also different skills for B2B versus B2C. So like we haven't talked too much about Kahoot, but like at Kahoot, it was very B2C heavy. So again, like you literally have millions of users using your product on a daily basis. So then it was more about A/B testing and validating with data to be able to kind of inform even the discovery with qualitative interviews, of course, than to execution. So the go-to-market was more scalable, it was more automated in some ways, especially on just normal feature deployments. But on B2B, like what we're doing is some of the features we're building are more targeted to our existing customers, and some things are definitely more based off the feedback of prospects. And so then it's not about us reaching out directly to the customer, because that's not who we're talking with. We're going to be going through a CSM or a customer success manager. So the go-to-market is very much about how can we enable a customer success manager? Why would they want to position this? Why would they want to talk to their customer about this? Or why would an account executive be interested in mentioning this in their goal of achieving and closing a sale? So it's just a different type of focus as well. And again, like there's differences with each one, but that's also what makes it super exciting is like product management
Absolutely.
forever. There's so much diversity.
I totally agree. Let's explore that diversity a little bit further, Melissa. So now that you're touching on this Kahoot versus Ardoc, like B2C, B2B, completely different worlds as you described. As a product leader, what were some of the aha moments you had when you started at Ardoc, or perhaps a few months in, that you didn't really think about that much at Kahoot because of the nature of the business?
I think one part was, or I can think of many actually. Now that I think about it, but a couple just immediately jump in my head. I think with like Kahoot, because because it's like basically a very, even though I wasn't a teacher, I'd use the product socially. And so I can naturally, there's a natural intuition on the product and how it's being used. It was a very shallow event. You're trying to get users to launch and play a game with at least 3 players. So there's a natural intuition in how you can interpret the data and how you can navigate the data. And then plus also, it's very data driven. That's wonderful. Like if you're comfortable with data and you're not scared by data, you can do a lot to kind of figure out what's valuable, what can drive value. And you can do A/B testing to ensure certainty and like whether or not this is actually going to help in total for the product or not. And again, at the volume Kahoot was at, like you're never quite sure if you're moving the needle because the volume is so high. That's why that A/B testing is so important, because you need to be able to definitively show whether or not it's helping the total volume or not. Because there's seasonality and things that change every day that can potentially skew those results. That's why A/B testing rocks with B2C companies at that scale. On the other side, like with Ardoc, one big kind of takeaway I had was it's just a really niche industry and it's quite complex. And so I had one case where I actually misinterpreted customer feedback. So I heard it and I thought I interpreted it, but then thanks to having a subject matter expert there, they actually clarified and gave me all this extra context I was missing that immediately I recognized why I interpreted it incorrectly. But it's just, I think it's this particular B2B is quite intense, but it's just the level of context that's required to be able to understand and interpret the data or the customer feedback thoughtfully is just so critical. That's also why when we have PMs and they have a particular domain that they cover, they need to know the ins and outs of that domain really, really well. But we actually have something recently we did where we had the subject matter team put together basically a test for us They basically simulated what a customer goes through, and it was our job to try and kind of build it out so we could really not just dog food the product our way, because we're not an enterprise customer. We're never going to have that one-to-one connection. We had to experience it like an enterprise customer would, and that was wonderful. So
That's cool.
yeah, but that's a great example of like the benefits of having that discussion and collaboration and working together. There's definitely different strengths that we bring to the table, and collectively
Yeah.
that's going to result in us getting the best solutions to our customers.
Absolutely. No, I really like you mentioning that. I had a chat not too long ago with Daniel Elizalde. He wrote the book, The B2B Innovators Map, and he talks about the importance of in B2B really understand your business, your industry, your domain
Yes.
as a product manager, because everything will be so dependent and most B2B industries are very specific. So, Melissa, the follow-up question to that is, if a PM starts in your team, for example, how do you onboard that person? Like, if someone is thinking about digging into B2B right now or joining a B2B
Yeah.
company, how can they get into the mud of the market and really understand it? How did you do it when you moved at Ardoc? What are some of the things that you've done that really helped you get up to speed?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I still don't feel like I'm quite up to speed, so I'm a bit of a phony here now. But and I'm pretty sure that's an honest interpretation. No, but one like we literally just had a PM join this week, and the first thing we do is we have this onboarding or training program we give to customers to use our product, because it's just there's a ramp up time to learning enterprise architecture tools. And he's going through that right now. So he's reading our knowledge base, he's reading our Help Center articles. I'm actually suggested he read competitor Help Center materials as well, so you can kind of get a lay of the land of how competitors also position it. And then he's going through the training program. And then once he goes through the training program, he'll probably spit up his own account that he can then play and test it like a sandbox account. And then we'll probably have him go through the same quiz that the tests that we all went through as well. I think, yeah, you're totally hit the nail on the head. Like, you really have to know the market in and out. I think the big part for me is I see the gaps because I'm not quite there yet. And that's where I know I need to fill them. And that's where I ask for help. That's where we pull someone else into the room. I think my team is actually much stronger at it than I am, because they're actually owning those parts of the product. And I've been trying to coach more on like product management and good practices and good principles, but I'm working on getting there for sure.
Absolutely. No, it takes a lot of time in B2B to really get up to speed. I worked in
100%
healthcare
it does.
for a few years.
And you totally need that, because if you can't, like a pendulum, you can't completely swing to one side and take all the customer's feedback like exactly verbatim, because it's customer feedback. It's biased. Any feedback's biased. That's why you need to review it aggregately. But if you don't know the industry, you're going to interpret it incorrectly, you're going to oversimplify it, and then you're going to build a bad solution, and that's inefficient as well. So
Absolutely.
that's also where like I feel like agile helps. It's like this keeps you honest feedback loop. And again, you sometimes spin your wheels a little bit, but then at least you're not developing down the wrong path. And that's a much higher cost. So again, the more we can kind of swing to both sides of the pendulum in terms of subject matter knowledge and then product management processes, then the more we improve as a whole, for sure.
I think it's a luxury to not be super into the industry in the beginning, because you have fresh eyes and you can see things and ask questions, and it's so typical. People get in and they don't know anything, and they start asking questions that they think are stupid questions, but they're really good questions. Like, wow, we didn't think about that, because they are seeing it with fresh eyes. And Mark Ritson is a marketing guru. You know, he always says that for a marketer, like not for a product person, but it actually applies, is a luxury not to know the product, because then you really can understand how the customer would think.
Yes.
Because as soon as you start, getting into the details, then you basically start
you're
biased.
ruined. You're gone.
Yeah, you're gone. You're biased, totally biased.
100%.
So I think that's important. But I also agree with you that it's super important to balance it, hopefully to have the domain experts available to you, and really navigate that. And as you said, remaining critical and using product management and design techniques to test your own assumptions and so on. And on that, Melissa, because you mentioned A/B testing and other experiments that work really well in B2C at scale, like Kahoot. For Ardoc, for a company like Ardoc, B2B SaaS, What are some of the discovery techniques or some of the experiments that you've been done recently that you like and recommend folks to dig into it? Is it only interviews, or do you run specific experiments, or you rely mostly on qualitative?
We are in a position where we have enough scale to do A/B testing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I do think there's other ways of doing that. Like a big part of what we do a combination of being data driven as well as like using the qualitative feedback. I think earlier on when we were deciding what to prioritize, we used user funnels. So we basically mapped the customer journey, and then we would track the drop-off rates at the different steps, the critical points of the customer journey, to try and identify maybe what was going on. And then again, that's where this power combination of qualitative and quantitative comes into play. Because like when we mapped that, we found that users were struggling to get past or get to the visualization, which is a really critical step in the product. And then when we showed this to the commercial teams, they were like, "Oh yeah, because of da 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 da." And again, a lot of the feedback was we made some of the features in the product, we made the user flows a little too complex. We had added too many functionalities, and so the users were getting lost, and so they weren't getting to these really critical focal points in their journey. And then if they can't get to those points, then they're definitely not going to get to the even more advanced steps down the road that add even more value to them. So that's where we kind of use that to provide the direction of what to focus on. And then once we did that, each team has domains that they own, and they track the user behavior and they track the engagements. And then we do a lot of qualitative feedback and user research with the design team as well to validate what we're doing too.
Cool. Very interesting. All right, let's move into a different topic that I think founders and more like growth-oriented people that are listening to this conversation might be interested about. Sure. Let's dig into Ardoc a little bit and the journey, the growth journey that you've had. I'm curious, and like just share whatever you want to share, whatever you can. But with such really interesting growth, especially in Norway. What are some of the, in your opinion, the most important decisions that kind of you made with the team to get to this point? Like what unlocked growth? What are some of the biggest aha moments you've had at Ardoc when it comes to B2B SaaS?
I feel like we're always trying to unlock growth. So I don't know if we've unlocked it yet. I think like, okay. So when you're at the stage where you've already gotten to product market fit and you're trying to go from like start to scale up, which is kind of the stage Ardoc is at, like a big part when I joined was I noticed there wasn't a lot of middle management, like basically people my level. It was basically the exec team and then everyone who was working. And so like one person I remember mentioned, it was a bit of like micro optimizing, like everyone was trying to do their best for the company. There was this mission towards the company, which was beautiful and wonderful to feel empowered like that. But there wasn't necessarily this like coordination and alignment. And so for the past year and a half, we've been building out, since the funding round we received, we've been building out leaders who know what good looks like, who know how to lead teams, like me for product and for the CS7 team and for marketing and for our account management team. And so we've been hiring out those individuals. And so up until we hired those individuals, a big part was just trying to align people together to make sure that there was focus and clarity. So rather than everyone doing a bunch of little things, we were doing a handful of really big things together. And so from a product management perspective, in order to be able to have multiple teams working on one initiative with potential dependencies and connections, that requires a certain degree of experience and skill and understanding. So for the first like 6 to 9 months, it was really about me getting the PMs that I had and working together, and we basically training them up and showing them what good looks like, and having them run their domains and building momentum with their teams and getting things deployed, which is huge. I don't ever want to underestimate that. Like being able to get trust in a team and getting them to work effectively together is so critical. So once we got to that stage where the teams were working, they were operating, they were consistent, we were getting things deployed on a regular basis, then we could start to do these more aggressive strategies where it's like, okay, we got to fix this step to a visualization. Let's get 3 teams and have them pull together on this and just work through this. And that was, I think that's what's really helped us kind of get momentum. And it's also been a great opportunity because the commercial teams see what we're doing, and they also see why we're saying no to things they're asking. But then I'm hoping it's building trust because we're actually building the things that they're asking for. And then we, again, like there's always things we have to say no to, but then by focusing on the biggest things and trying to move them in a drastic way, it reinforces that continuous feedback loop that we're trying to build with them.
Absolutely. And that relationship, sales and product, is so important in B2B.
100%.
Yeah.
We got to make money. Product management. We got to make sure that we're making the bill. We're not a nonprofit. Like, we're all here. We got to make sure we're achieving that. You can't forget that. It's easy to forget that when you're not in front of the customers or you're not selling. That can't be understated.
Absolutely. And you can learn so much from sales, especially in B2B, because they talk to customers so much. I'm looking into trying to understand a bit more in detail if there's anything you try to do to foster that relationship, like product and sales at Ardoc. Is there anything, any habits, any ceremonies, anything that you do at Ardoc that help foster that relationship, or is it just natural?
Yeah. I'd love to think it's just natural, but no, I think we had a bit of work. No. So basically, when I first joined, there wasn't really a strong feedback loop. Again, like I think it was because there's just a lot of independent parts moving in different directions. And so a big thing is, again, whatever we work on, any customers we have, they're going to be up for renewals. We need to make sure we're maintaining these accounts with these big customers. There needs to be this feedback loop with commercials to know that we're anchoring what we're building in something that that the market will respond to. Also, that's where the customers are. We got to get that feedback to make sure we're building in that direction so we have good retention of our customer base. So when I first joined, I actually got paired up with one of our, he's called VP of Pre-Sales. His team, many of them are ex-enterprise architects, and they've shifted to selling enterprise architecture. And so they understand the complexity of the product, the detail of the product. They could understand what the customers were asking for and could translate it in a really clear way. And so that was what really helped because, again, I lacked that knowledge too. And so it immediately kind of created a good feedback loop where we could figure out how could the product managers work in this direction and also align to the customer leads. So we did like I said, we worked independently for a while. So we did things to try and get wins for that. Like we built out audit logging, which was something that was being asked for. We built out a usage report to kind of help with these kinds of things. So we were able to kind of get some momentum. But feedback was, you're just fixing paper cuts. This is death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's when we realized if we wanted to move the needle on actually driving value, we had to pool together on trying to solve these big problems. And to do that, we got stakeholders from different teams together. We aligned on what that priority was. And then we actually, once we got that commitment, we shared it with the teams. Each team found the role they could play in it. They aligned what they were going to do with the stakeholders. And then we did a big design sprint. And I know in a traditional design sprint, you bring customers to the things. We just did a 3-day design sprint with the different commercial teams and our subject matter experts joining the solutioning exercises. And I think it really helped foster this ideation and this idea of what we would build for customers. And we built a lot of the solutions, or it basically kicked off even further development after of what we were thinking. But it created that really good feedback loop. And so we could kind of see through what we did. And then essentially we've been trying to finish what we've been building ever since. And and I think we're due for another design sprint soon, which is wonderful. That's a really good sign. And now that we know what we've done before, now the teams can even take more autonomy with that, and they have their own ideas of what they could do.
Really good. Okay, another question on this sort of growth spiral.
Yeah.
For folks that work in B2B SaaS,
Yeah.
and they're struggling to get product market fit, because you mentioned that, Ardoc, when you joined, there was already that stage, or product market fit was already established in a way. But what are sort of the most important things you would advise or you would recommend a B2B SaaS product manager or founder or product leader to be doing to get the product market fit that they so much desire? What are some of the things that you would recommend them to look into?
Yeah, so we actually, when I was at Involve, that was a B2B SaaS company focusing on AI. And we didn't quite have product market fit. And I don't think it was ever officially announced that we didn't, but you could see some of them. Like, I guess I don't know if it ever is, but like
town hall meeting, guys. We don't have product market fit.
I know, right? That's a totally reasonable expectation for like a Series A or pre-seed company.
Sure.
But again, like you're kind of going blind. You're learning as you're going in that kind of stage of a company. And it just felt like there was just a ton of resistance. Like the feedback wasn't really consistent with customers. It was all over the place. The sales that we were closing were all over the place. We really couldn't find any continuity in the themes that we were getting. And that made it really difficult to kind of focus the product and kind of get that direction. And then I think ultimately what we realized is we decided to do a major pivot, and we realized we needed to better understand what problem we were trying to solve. And so we went and interviewed 300 potential customers or existing customers as well, just 300 in total, just audited.
Wow, 300, that's crazy.
We went hard again, but like you rally, like this is what you do. And we were able to better kind of understand the problems that customers were facing, and we were trying to fix that. And then we had one idea that we were running with, and I was working on that for a while. But I think that's part of it too, is you got to move fast and you got to iterate. Like when you have product market fit, everything just falls into place. You're just trying to keep up. You know, Kahoot's a great example. Like there was an opportunity, it went viral. Like you're just trying to keep up with demand, but it's clear what you need to do. The money's coming in, people are paying for it. Like when everything feels like a struggle when it isn't. So I feel like you just got to keep iterating. You just got to keep iterating and trying until you find what it is. And understanding your customers, understanding that market, like you said, is so critical. And again, I feel like we took another shot, and I felt like it was a good shot. I'm not sure what happened after I left, but you know, maybe it also had to evolve again. You know, that's always the case. So it's just about kind of keeping and going until you find everything clicks. And that's just really hard to do, and it takes a while, and that can be really discouraging to pick it up and try it again so often.
Absolutely.
Well, that's probably a better question for our founders, or my boss, who was the first employee here at Ardoc. He was here from the very beginning, so
right.
Maybe that's a follow-up podcast for you.
Yes, I do want to interview some founders in follow-up seasons. Probably I'll get in touch. Melissa, this was so fantastic. Time is running up. I'm really happy you took the time. I'm really glad we had this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be super valuable for folks that are listening right now.
I hope so. And I hope this was enjoyable for you. I'm hoping that there was some incremental value to hear. I know you're talking with a ton of incredible people, so I really hope I didn't waste your time.
Incredible people like you. Thank you so much for joining.
No. Not at all.
All right. Have a great one.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Alright, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss out, and see you next time.